Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Edith.
We are embarking on a comprehensive, evidence-based expedition into the very mechanism of human connection. This isn't just about learning how to make small talk or giving a firm handshake. We are here to decode the entire infrastructure of social dynamics.
That's right. We are going to strip away the vague advice often found in self-help books and replace it with rigorous science. We're starting from the inside out, looking at the internal neurobiology that governs our fears and desires, and moving all the way to the practical mastery of conversation, nonverbal communication, and the architecture of long-term relationships.
It is a journey from the microscopic firing of neurons to the macroscopic complexity of social networks, and we are beginning at the absolute foundation. Before we can build connection, we have to understand what blocks it. Today, we are dissecting the biological and psychological machinery of social fear.
It's the question that plagues so many of us. Why does a simple conversation sometimes feel like a life-or-death situation? Why do our bodies react to a room full of strangers the same way they would react to a predator in the wild?
We are going to analyze the epidemic of social anxiety, the specific neurobiology of the threat detection system, the cognitive distortions that trap us in a loop of avoidance, and the evidence-based protocols for breaking that pattern.
It's vital to start here because you cannot engineer a solution if you don't understand the problem. If you don't know why your hands shake or why your mind goes blank, you feel broken. But when you understand the mechanics, it stops being a character flaw and starts being a system you can optimize.
Precisely. And to understand the scale of this system, we have to look at the data. Social anxiety is often treated as a niche issue, but the statistics tell a very different story. Current epidemiological data suggests that approximately 12% of the population will meet the diagnostic criteria for social anxiety disorder at some point in their lives.
That is a staggering number. If you walk into a crowded room, statistically, 1 in every 10 people there isn't just nervous. They are fighting a physiological battle against an overwhelming urge to flee.
And that number might actually be a conservative estimate of the broader struggle. If you look at digital behavior, specifically on platforms like Reddit, the subreddit r/social skills has ballooned to over 6.3 million members. That is a massive sample size of individuals actively seeking help, advice, or simply commiseration regarding their ability to interact with others.
It highlights a modern paradox. We are more digitally connected than ever, yet we seem to be losing the manual for face-to-face interaction. But I think it's important we make a distinction early on. We see a lot of confusion between social anxiety, introversion, and shyness. They aren't the same thing, are they?
No, they are fundamentally different constructs. Introversion is a temperamental preference for lower stimulation environments. An introvert recharges in solitude but can function perfectly well socially. Shyness is a mild form of reservation or hesitancy. Social anxiety, however, is rooted in fear. It is the intense, persistent fear of being watched and judged by others. It is not a preference. It is a pathology of scrutiny.
I like to think of it this way. An introvert chooses to stay home because they enjoy the quiet. A person with social anxiety stays home because they are terrified of what might happen if they go out. One is a choice, the other is a prison.
That distinction brings us directly to the neurobiology. When we talk about this prison, we are not speaking metaphorically. We are talking about a specific neural pathway. At the center of this is the amygdala.
The brain's threat detection center.
Correct. The amygdala is an almond-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe. Its primary job is to identify danger and initiate the survival response. In a neurotypical brain, the amygdala lights up when it sees a snake or a speeding car. In the socially anxious brain, the amygdala lights up in response to a neutral face, a pause in conversation, or the prospect of public speaking.
So the hardware is essentially misinterpreting the data. It's treating a social ambiguity as a physical threat.
Exactly. Once the amygdala perceives this threat, it activates the HPA axis, the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis. This is the command chain for stress. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland, which signals the adrenal glands to flood the system with cortisol and adrenaline.
And that is why we feel it physically. This isn't all in your head in the sense that it's imaginary. It is physically in your body. The racing heart, the trembling hands, the sweating, that is the HPA axis doing exactly what it was designed to do if you were running from a bear.
The problem, of course, is that you are not running from a bear. You are trying to order coffee or introduce yourself to a colleague. This flood of stress hormones shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational part of the brain responsible for language and planning. This is why people report their mind going blank. The survival brain has hijacked the thinking brain.
It's like a fire alarm going off in a library. The noise is so loud and the panic is so high that you can't read the book in front of you, even though there is no actual fire. It's a false alarm, but the ear-splitting noise is very real.
And recent research suggests this sensitivity might be partially hardwired. We are looking at genetic factors, specifically variations on chromosome 16 and the endomenocytase gene. There are also polymorphisms in the serotonergic and dopaminergic systems that regulate how we process reward and threat. Some brains are simply genetically predisposed to be hypervigilant.
Which is incredibly validating for people to hear. If you have this genetic predisposition, it means you aren't weak. You are working with a sensitive alarm system. But biology isn't destiny. The environment and our behavior play a massive role in whether that alarm keeps ringing.
That leads us to the psychological component, the vicious cycle of avoidance. The biological spark creates the fear, but our behavior throws gasoline on it. It usually centers around a concept known as the reveal.
The reveal is that deep-seated terror that if people saw who we really were, or if they saw us trembling or blushing, they would reject us immediately. It's the fear of exposing a fatal flaw.
So, to prevent the reveal, the anxious individual engages in safety behaviors. These are subtle avoidance tactics, avoiding eye contact, rehearsing sentences before speaking, wearing inconspicuous clothing, or checking a phone constantly to appear busy.
It's a shield. We think, if I hold this shield up, I'm safe. But the shield actually prevents us from gathering new data. If I never look anyone in the eye, I never see the welcoming smiles. I only assume everyone is glaring at me.
Precisely. This is the self-fulfilling prophecy. The anxiety about appearing anxious creates more anxiety. If you are monitoring your own heartbeat and speech rate while trying to talk, you will inevitably appear distracted or awkward, which then elicits a confused reaction from the other person, which confirms your belief that you are socially incompetent.
You're trying to walk a tightrope while staring at your feet. You're so focused on not falling that you wobble. Whereas if you just looked ahead and walked, you'd likely be fine.
This loop is maintained by cognitive distortions. The brain of a socially anxious person is an unreliable narrator. We see three primary distortions: catastrophizing, mind reading, and fortune-telling.
Catastrophizing is taking a small error, like stuttering on a word, and escalating it to, everyone thinks I'm an idiot and I'll never get promoted.
Mind reading is the assumption that we know what others are thinking, and that it is invariably negative. He looked at his watch, so he must be bored by me, rather than, he looked at his watch because he has a train to catch.
And fortune-telling is predicting the future failure. There's no point in going to the party, I'll just stand in the corner and feel awkward. When you predict that, you usually make it happen because you enter the room with defensive body language.
So we have a genetic predisposition, a hyperactive amygdala, and a set of cognitive distortions reinforcing safety behaviors. It seems impenetrable. However, the science of treatment is robust. The gold standard for breaking this pattern is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBT is essentially about acting like a scientist with your own thoughts. It challenges you to look at the evidence. When you think, everyone laughed at me, CBT asks, did they? Or did one person laugh at a joke across the room?
Studies show CBT has a 70 to 80% success rate in significantly reducing symptoms. But the crucial component within CBT for social anxiety is exposure.
This is the hard part. You cannot think your way out of a feeling. You have to act your way out. Exposure means dropping the safety behaviors and putting yourself in the situations you fear, specifically to see that the catastrophe doesn't happen.
It operates on the principle of habituation. If you stay in the fearful situation long enough without escaping, the amygdala eventually stops firing. The brain realizes, I am not dead. This is not a threat.
It's like getting into a cold pool. If you dip your toe in and run away, it stays freezing. If you jump in and tread water, eventually your body regulates and the water feels fine. You have to stay in the social pool long enough for the water to warm up.
But it must be gradual. We don't start by giving a TED Talk. We start by asking a stranger for the time, or making eye contact with a cashier. This is cognitive restructuring in action. We rewrite the neural pathways by proving the alarm system wrong, over and over again.
And that is the key takeaway here. The fear response is automatic, but it is not unchangeable. The brain is plastic. We can retrain the amygdala to distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a dinner party.
Absolutely. We have established that social anxiety is a biological false alarm reinforced by psychological avoidance. But once we begin to dismantle that anxiety, we face a new question. What happens if we don't interact? What happens when the barrier isn't fear, but simply the absence of others?
We move from the internal chaos of anxiety to the crushing silence of isolation. Because while anxiety pushes us away from people, the result is often a profound loneliness that damages us just as deeply.
That is where we will turn our attention next. In the next episode, The Science of Loneliness and Social Connection, we will explore why loneliness is now considered a modern epidemic. We will look at how isolation physically changes the structure of the brain, causing volume loss in the hippocampus and temporal lobes.
And we'll discuss why the brain interprets loneliness as a physical injury and how we can begin to reconnect.
From understanding the fear that keeps us apart to the biological imperative that drives us together. This is Social Skills Masterclass.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass,
where we decode the mechanics of human connection.
You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass. In our previous discussion, we dissected the anatomy of fear, specifically the amygdala's hijacking of the brain during social anxiety. We explored how the brain perceives a crowded room as a threat, triggering a cascade of cortisol and avoidance behaviors. We looked at the too much signal, too much stimulation, too much fear, too much scrutiny.
But today, we are flipping that coin. If the last episode was about the fire of anxiety, this one is about the ice of isolation. We are looking at what happens when the signal isn't too much, but rather not enough.
Precisely. We are shifting our focus from the presence of social threat to the absence of social reward. This is a look into the science of loneliness and social connection. It is a topic that sounds poetic or perhaps purely emotional, but as we will see, it is deeply biological. We're going to explore the neuroscience of isolation, what literally happens to the gray matter in your brain when you are cut off from the herd.
And this isn't just about feeling a bit sad on a Friday night. We are going to unpack the structural changes that occur in the brain, the biological imperative that makes connection a survival mechanism, and the paradoxical negativity bias that loneliness creates, where the lonelier you get, the more your brain interprets neutral interactions as hostile.
We will also touch on the reversibility of these states, which is crucial, and how to distinguish between healthy solitude and damaging isolation. This builds directly on our understanding of the social brain. If anxiety is a malfunction of our threat detection system, loneliness is a malfunction of our reward and maintenance systems.
So let's set the stage. We are hearing the term epidemic thrown around a lot regarding loneliness, especially in the post-pandemic landscape. But before we look at the brain scans, we need to define our terms. What are we actually talking about here?
That is the critical distinction. There is a massive difference between social isolation and loneliness. Isolation is objective. It is a measure of the number of contacts you have, the hours you spend alone, or the lack of a network. It is a data point. Loneliness, however, is subjective. It is the distress caused by a discrepancy between the social relationships you want and the ones you actually have.
I like to think of it like hunger. You can be in a room full of food, but if you can't eat any of it, you're starving. Similarly, you can be in a marriage, a busy office, or a crowded city and feel profoundly lonely. Conversely, you can be a hermit in a cabin for a month and feel perfectly content. Loneliness isn't about where you are. It's about how your brain is interpreting your standing in the group.
That interpretation is becoming increasingly grim for millions. We are seeing data indicating that while we are more digitally connected, the subjective experience of disconnection is spiking. The brain creates a specific distress signal when it perceives this gap. And this brings us to the neurobiology. When we say your brain on loneliness, we aren't speaking metaphorically. There are observable structural changes that occur when an individual perceives themselves as socially isolated for long periods.
It is fascinating and terrifying. We tend to think of the brain as this static computer, but it's more like a muscle that atrophies without exercise. If you don't use your social circuits, the hardware actually degrades.
The research highlights volume loss in very specific areas: the temporal lobes, the frontal lobes, and the hippocampus. One of the most striking findings involves the ventral striatum. This is the core of the brain's reward system. In a socially connected brain, the ventral striatum lights up in anticipation of social contact. It motivates you to go talk to someone.
But in a chronically lonely brain, that light dims. It's a use it or lose it scenario. If you haven't experienced the reward of a good conversation in months, the brain stops predicting that reward. It stops releasing the dopamine that says, go say hello. It creates a lethargy that makes it even harder to break the cycle.
And simultaneously, while the reward center powers down, another system powers up: the default mode network, or DMN. This is the network active when we aren't focused on a specific task, when we are daydreaming or recalling memories. In lonely individuals, the DMN doesn't just hum quietly. It goes into overdrive.
This is the engine of rumination. When a connected person has downtime, their brain might wander to a grocery list or a movie they saw. When a lonely person has downtime, that overactive DMN plunges them into reviewing every social mistake they've ever made, analyzing why they are alone, and rehearsing future rejections. It's mental exhaustion without physical movement.
This leads to what researchers call the negativity bias. This is perhaps the most cruel irony of loneliness. You would think that a lonely person would be desperate for connection and therefore hyper-receptive to it. But the neuroscience shows the opposite. The lonely brain becomes hyper-vigilant to social threats. It enters a self-preservation mode where it scans for rejection.
Imagine you are walking in a dark forest. You become jumpy. A twig snapping sounds like a predator. Loneliness puts your brain in that dark forest. If someone glances at you neutrally, a connected brain thinks, they are just looking around. The lonely brain thinks, they are judging me. You interpret neutral cues as negative,
which creates a behavioral feedback loop. Because you perceive hostility where there is none, you withdraw further, or you act defensively, which actually does push people away. You end up creating the rejection you feared. It accelerates brain aging, effectively making the brain look older than its chronological age.
It's a security system that locks the homeowner out of their own house. But why? Why would evolution design a system that makes us miserable and then sabotages our attempts to fix it?
To understand that, we have to look at the biological imperative. We are obligate gregarious species. We do not survive alone. In the ancestral environment, isolation meant death, literally. Being separated from the tribe meant you were vulnerable to predators or starvation. So the pain of loneliness is not a defect. It is an alarm system. It is physically designed to be aversive, just like physical pain is designed to make you pull your hand away from a hot stove.
So the rumination, the hypervigilance, that's the brain screaming, you are unsafe, find the tribe. The problem is, in the modern world, we aren't usually at risk of being eaten by a lion if we spend the weekend alone. But our neurobiology hasn't caught up to our apartment complexes.
Exactly. And this biological imperative is built on specific mechanisms. We have mirror neurons, for instance. These are neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. They allow us to simulate the internal state of another person, the foundation of empathy.
They are the Wi-Fi of the brain. When I smile and you see it, your brain fires in the same pattern as if you were smiling. It allows us to catch emotions. In lonely individuals, this signal can get scrambled or simply go unused.
There is also the phenomenon of neural synchronization. When two people are deeply engaged in conversation, their brain activity actually syncs up. The listener's brain activity begins to mirror the speaker's, sometimes even anticipating the neural firing before the words are spoken. This coupling triggers a release of a neurochemical cocktail: dopamine for reward, oxytocin for bonding, and endorphins for pain relief.
That is the click we feel. You know when you meet someone and the conversation just flows? That isn't magic. That is neural synchronization. It's a biological reward for being in tune. When you are isolated, you are in a state of chemical withdrawal from these substances.
And that withdrawal has massive physiological consequences. We aren't just talking about mental health here. The mortality risk associated with chronic loneliness is staggering. One meta-analysis equated it to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It exceeds the risk factors of obesity and physical inactivity.
That comparison to smoking always stops people in their tracks. We have public health campaigns for smoking, for diet, for exercise, but we rarely see a billboard saying, "Call a friend, it's good for your arteries."
It affects the cardiovascular system directly. Loneliness increases vascular resistance. Basically, your arteries tighten up. It raises blood pressure. It elevates cortisol, which we discussed in the last episode regarding anxiety, but here it is a chronic, low-level hum that wears down the immune system. It increases inflammation in the body, which is a precursor to heart disease, stroke, and cognitive decline.
It creates a state of physiological siege. Your body is bracing for an attack because, again, it believes you are alone in the wilderness.
However, we must pivot to the hopeful aspect of this science. The brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity means that these structural changes, the volume loss in the hippocampus, the downregulation of the ventral striatum, are not permanent scars. They are adaptations to an environment. If you change the environment, the brain adapts back.
That is the critical takeaway. You can rebuild the muscle. Just because you have been isolated and feel that rest in your social skills, it doesn't mean you have lost the ability. It just means the machinery is dormant.
This brings us to the practical side of things, recognizing the pattern. We see this frequently in online communities, like the Our Social Skills discussions we track. You see threads titled, "I lost my social skills in my 30s," or "I feel like I have no life."
Those threads are heartbreaking but also revealing. Often, people confuse "I don't know how to talk to people" with "I am currently out of practice." They feel the awkwardness, the lack of dopamine reward, and they assume "I am broken."
They are experiencing that negativity bias and the ventral striatum's lack of anticipation. They try to socialize, it feels flat or terrifying, and they retreat.
We need to help listeners distinguish between chosen solitude and painful isolation. Solitude is restorative. You choose it. You feel refreshed. Your DMN might be active, but it's daydreaming, not catastrophic rumination. Isolation is draining. It feels like being locked out. If you find yourself assuming that people don't want to talk to you, or if you leave social interactions feeling exhausted and analyzing every word you said, that is the loneliness pattern.
Correct. It is the difference between a pause and a stoppage. Solitude is a pause. Isolation is a stoppage of the flow of social regulation. The first step in breaking the pattern is simply recognizing that the danger signal your brain is sending, the anxiety about reaching out, the assumption that others are judging you, is a biological illusion caused by the isolation itself.
It's the flu talking. When you have the flu, you feel like you'll never have energy again. When you are lonely, you feel like you'll never connect again. Both are symptoms, not prophecies.
Recognizing that the brain has shifted into a defensive, hypervigilant mode allows us to intellectually override the impulse to withdraw. We have to force the machinery to restart, to seek that neural synchronization, even when the ventral striatum isn't providing the motivation to do so.
It's mechanical at first. You have to crank the engine by hand before it starts running on its own. You engage in small interactions, not expecting them to change your life instantly, but understanding that you are literally feeding your temporal lobes and calming your amygdala.
In this episode, we've established why we need connection and the severe biological costs of going without it. We've looked at how the brain changes, becoming fearful and biased toward negativity when isolated. We understand that this is a survival mechanism gone wrong in the modern age.
But there is a hurdle we haven't cleared yet. We know we need to connect to heal our brains. But for many, the attempt to connect brings a new kind of terror. It's not just the fear of the interaction, it's the devastating pain of the potential no.
Precisely. We've covered the anxiety of the approach and the biology of the isolation. In the next episode, we are going to tackle the barrier that keeps people isolated even when they try to break out: rejection sensitivity.
We're going to explore why no literally hurts, why physical pain centers in the brain light up when we are socially rejected.
And we will discuss how to build psychological armor, moving from a state of fragility where one rejection shatters you to a state of resilience.
It's about learning how to take a hit and keep moving.
Until then, consider your own social interactions this week not just as pleasantries, but as necessary maintenance for your biological machinery.
Keep the gears turning.
This is Social Skills Masterclass. You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass.
Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass.
Today, we are beginning with a single monosyllabic word. It is perhaps the most feared word in the human language, despite being one of the simplest. No.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Sound waves hitting the eardrum translated into electrical signals. But for so many of us, those signals don't just register as information. They register as a threat, a physical blow.
Precisely. We are dissecting the mechanism of that threat response. In our previous discussion, we mapped the landscape of loneliness and established how prolonged isolation physically alters the brain, specifically creating a negativity bias, where we become hyper-attuned to social threats. Today, we are taking the next logical step in this scientific journey. We are moving from the state of isolation to the moment of interaction, specifically the moment that interaction goes wrong, or when we perceive that it has gone wrong.
We're talking about rejection, but not just the act of being turned down. We're digging into rejection sensitivity, the neurobiology of why it hurts, the cognitive traps that keep us stuck in fear, and crucially, how to build the psychological armor to withstand it. We'll be covering everything from the specific brain regions that light up when you're ignored, to the link between perfectionism and imposter syndrome, and finally, how to perform rejection therapy to retrain your nervous system.
This is vital because you cannot master social dynamics if you are terrified of the feedback loop. If loneliness is the baseline state we are trying to escape, rejection sensitivity is the invisible electric fence keeping us there. So let's look at the definition. We often hear people say they are sensitive to criticism, but clinically there is a distinction between normal disappointment and what is known as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD.
Right. Everyone stings a little when they don't get the invite or the promotion. That's human. But RSD is different. It's characterized by an intense, unbearable emotional pain. It's not just, I feel bad. It is a physiological wave of dysphoria, which literally means difficult to bear, triggered by the perception of being rejected, teased, or criticized by important people in your life.
And the key word there is perception. The rejection does not always have to be real for the biological cascade to occur. This condition is frequently comorbid with neurodivergent profiles, particularly ADHD and autism. The nervous system in these cases is often wired without the same filtering mechanisms that others might have, making emotional input feel raw and unfiltered. But the question I find most compelling is, why does it hurt? I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean, why do we describe social exclusion using words like hurt, crushed, or broken?
It's one of the most striking discoveries in neuroscience. Evolution is efficient. It doesn't like to build new systems when old ones will do. When we look at fMRI scans of people experiencing social rejection, say looking at a picture of an ex-partner or being excluded from a virtual ball-tossing game, the brain regions that light up are the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula.
Exactly. These are the exact same regions responsible for processing the distress component of physical pain. If you break your leg, the sensory cortex tells you where the break is and how intense it is, but the anterior cingulate cortex registers the suffering associated with that damage. Social rejection piggybacks on this exact system. To your brain, being ostracized from the tribe is a threat to survival, just as immediate as a physical wound.
So when someone says it felt like a punch to the gut, they aren't being dramatic. Their anterior insula is firing as if they had actually been punched.
Correct. And for neurodivergent individuals or those with high rejection sensitivity, that volume dial is turned all the way up. This leads to a phenomenon called splitting, or black and white thinking. You oscillate between feeling perfectly connected and feeling utterly worthless. There is no gray area.
That oscillation creates a vicious cycle. If you anticipate that pain, that physical pain of rejection, you become hypervigilant. You scan every interaction for signs of danger. A friend doesn't use an emoji in a text? Rejection. A colleague looks at their watch while you're speaking? Rejection. You start seeing ghosts, and because you're reacting to these ghosts with defensiveness or withdrawal, you often create the very rejection you were trying to avoid.
This brings us to the cognitive patterns that sustain the sensitivity. We have the biological hardware firing pain signals, but we also have the software, the cognitive distortions that interpret those signals. One of the most pervasive is mind reading.
Oh, mind reading is a classic. It's the arrogance of assuming you know the internal state of another person better than they do. You decide, they think I'm boring, based on zero evidence. Then there's catastrophizing. That's when a single awkward silence isn't just an awkward silence. It's proof that you are socially inept and will die alone.
It is a failure of scope. You're taking a singular data point, a micro-interaction, and extrapolating it to define your entire identity. This is overgeneralization. One rejection equals nobody likes me. This feeds directly into a concept deeply linking social anxiety with professional performance: imposter syndrome.
I see this constantly. People assume imposter syndrome is just about work, but it's fundamentally about social belonging. It's the fear of being found out and subsequently cast out.
Dr. Valerie Young identified several subtypes of this, and they map very neatly onto social insecurity. You have the perfectionist, who sets impossibly high standards and views any minor social stumble as a catastrophic failure.
Then there's the natural genius. If they don't instantly click with a new group or master a conversation immediately, they feel shame. They think social skills should be innate, not learned.
There is also the expert, who fears they will look foolish if they don't know every answer or every cultural reference in a conversation. The soloist, who feels that asking for help or support is a sign of weakness. And the superhuman, who pushes themselves to excel in every single role: parent, partner, worker, friend, to cover up the insecurity of not feeling good enough.
The mechanism here is the imposter cycle. You face a social or professional task, anxiety spikes, you either over-prepare, rehearsing conversations in the shower, memorizing jokes, or you procrastinate because the fear is too high. When you succeed, or the social event goes well, you don't internalize it. You say, I got lucky, or they just haven't realized I'm boring yet. You discount the victory, so your confidence never grows. The relief is temporary, but the fear remains.
So, we have a brain that interprets rejection as physical damage and a cognitive structure that reinforces the fear of that damage. The question is, how do we interrupt this? How do we build resilience?
We have to start with cognitive restructuring. It sounds clinical, but think of it as fact-checking your own brain. When you think, they hate me because I stuttered, you have to put that thought on trial. What is the evidence? Is there an alternative explanation? Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't notice.
This requires a level of detachment that is difficult to achieve in the heat of the moment. That is where mindfulness comes in, not as a relaxation technique, but as a tool for sitting with discomfort.
Exactly. The goal isn't to not feel the sting. It's to feel the sting and not react. It's the difference between being in a burning building and watching a fire in a fireplace. You acknowledge the sensation, okay, my chest is tight, I feel ashamed, without letting it dictate your next move.
And we must distinguish between actual rejection and perceived rejection. The vast majority of what we call rejection is actually ambiguity.
I love the concept of the safe network for this. You need a few people who have earned the right to hear your story. When you're spiraling, you go to them and say, "My story is telling me that everyone at that party hated me." They can help you recalibrate reality.
This recalibration leads us to a fundamental shift in perspective, the growth mindset. Carol Dweck's research is usually applied to academics, but it is profoundly applicable to social dynamics. A fixed mindset says, "I am awkward and rejection proves I am broken." A growth mindset says, "Social skills are a muscle. Rejection is data."
Rejection is redirection. That's the mantra. If you adopt a growth mindset, you stop viewing social interactions as a test you pass or fail. Instead, they become social experiments.
I like that distinction. A test implies judgment on your worth. An experiment implies gathering information. If you make a joke and nobody laughs, you haven't failed as a human. You have simply gathered data that that specific joke or that specific delivery did not work with that specific audience.
And research bears this out. Studies show that individuals who view social attributes as malleable, changeable, report significantly lower levels of loneliness and better coping mechanisms for distress. They don't take it personally because they know they can improve.
However, mindset shifts often require behavioral reinforcement. We cannot just think our way out of rejection sensitivity. We must act our way out. This brings us to the concept of gradual exposure, or what is sometimes popularly called rejection therapy.
This is the scary part, but it's the most effective. You have to deliberately seek out the no.
The logic is based on habituation. If you avoid rejection, your amygdala continues to tag it as a life-threatening event. By voluntarily exposing yourself to small, manageable rejections, you teach your brain that the anticipated catastrophe does not occur. You survive.
You start with a hierarchy. Don't ask your crush out on a date for your first experiment. Start with something low stakes. Ask a stranger for the time, then ask them a follow-up question. Or, the classic rejection therapy challenge, ask for a discount on a cup of coffee.
That is a prime example. The goal isn't to get the discount. The goal is to hear the barista say, "No, I can't do that," and realize that the floor didn't open up and swallow you. The other patrons didn't point and laugh. You simply pay for the coffee and move on.
It's about building a rejection resume. You start to collect these moments. I asked for an upgrade and got denied. I tried to join a conversation and got ignored. When you look back at that resume, you realize you are still standing. The fear loses its teeth.
It deconditions the response. The anterior cingulate cortex may still fire, but the cognitive interpretation changes from "I am dying" to "this is an unpleasant but temporary sensation."
And that brings us back to where we started. That negativity bias we talked about in the last episode, the brain's tendency to latch on to the bad, can be rewritten, but only if we stop running from the feeling of being pushed away.
Precisely. We move from a defensive posture, protecting our imposter self, to an offensive posture, where we are actively seeking data to improve our social algorithms.
But here is the catch. Even if you master the internal game, even if you are resilient and brave, you still need to know how to navigate the external world accurately. We've talked about how we feel, but how do we know what they are really thinking?
That is the crucial missing piece. We often perceive rejection because we are misinterpreting the data stream coming from other people. We are reading silence as anger or distraction as disinterest.
We are guessing, and usually we're guessing wrong.
To stop guessing, we need to understand the hidden language of interaction. In our next episode, Reading and Sending Social Cues, we are going to decode the other 93% of communication.
We'll be diving into the neuroscience of eye contact, why your body language might be betraying you, and how to read the room with precision so you don't have to rely on guesswork.
Until then, remember that the pain of rejection is evidence of your biology, not your deficiency. This is Social Skills Masterclass.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass.
Today, we are stepping into the invisible current that runs beneath every interaction we have ever had. We are looking at the silent stream of data that dictates whether a conversation feels safe or threatening, connected or distant.
It is the operating system that runs in the background while our words act as the user interface. If the operating system is glitching, it doesn't matter how pretty the interface looks, the program is going to crash.
Precisely. We are discussing the reading and sending of social cues. Specifically, we are going to dissect the neuroscience of nonverbal communication, the mechanics of eye contact and neurosynchronization, and the subtle art of paralinguistics. We need to understand why the brain prioritizes body language over spoken language and how we can recalibrate our ability to detect these signals.
And this is the vital next step in our journey. In our last discussion, we navigated the internal landscape of rejection-sensitive dysphoria and the neurobiology of emotional pain. We talked about how the brain can trigger a fire alarm even when there is no smoke. Today is about learning how to check the sensors. It is about distinguishing between a genuine signal of rejection and a neutral cue that our anxiety has misinterpreted.
That distinction is crucial. We often treat social cues as mystical intuition, but they are actually quantifiable biological data points. Let's begin with the hierarchy of communication. There is a very famous statistic from the 1960s by Albert Mehrabian that is often cited in social psychology. It suggests that the actual words we speak account for only 7% of the message being received.
The famous 7-38-55 rule: 7% is the verbal content, 38% is the vocal quality or tone, and a staggering 55% is body language. Now, we have to be careful with this statistic. It specifically applies to communicating feelings and attitudes, not factual information like directions to the train station. But in the context of relationships and social dynamics, it holds water.
It introduces the concept of congruence. If I tell you, I am incredibly happy for you, but my arms are crossed, my jaw is tight, and my pitch is flat, your brain will statistically ignore the words and believe the body.
Exactly. We are evolutionarily hardwired to trust the physical signal over the linguistic one. Think of it like a check engine light in a car. The dashboard display might say all systems go. That's the verbal message. But if you hear a grinding noise and smell smoke, that's the nonverbal message. You are going to pull over. When there is incongruence, the nonverbal signal is the grinding noise. It reveals the true intent.
Let's look at the machinery responsible for detecting that grinding noise. The neuroscience of social perception is incredibly complex because it involves integrating multiple sensory streams simultaneously. It isn't just one part of the brain lighting up, it is a symphony of regions working in concert.
It really is a high-speed data integration center.
At the forefront, we have the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, or VLPFC. This area is responsible for integrating facial expressions with vocalizations. It's trying to match what it sees with what it hears. Simultaneously, the medial prefrontal cortex is working to interpret the other person's intentions, essentially running a simulation of what does this person want from me?
And while that high-level processing is happening, you have the superior temporal sulcus, the STS. Think of the STS as the switchboard operator. It detects biological motion, where the eyes are looking, how the hands are moving, and combines that visual data with the auditory input. It's the hub where the sensory information converges before it gets sent to the emotional centers.
And one of those emotional centers is the basal amygdala. Recent research suggests the basal amygdala actually filters social emotional signals before they even reach the auditory cortex. This implies that our emotional reaction to a tone of voice might literally happen before we consciously hear the sound.
That is profound. It explains why we can feel an immediate visceral reaction to someone's vibe before we can articulate why. However, this system operates differently for everyone. For instance, in the autistic brain, we see reduced activity in the dorsal parietal cortex during eye contact and often impaired neurocoupling.
Correct. The dorsal parietal cortex is involved in attention and spatial orientation. If that activity is reduced, it suggests that for autistic individuals, the social hardware isn't automatically locking onto these cues in the same way. It's not a deficit of feeling, it's a variance in how the data is filtered and prioritized.
It's like having a different operating system. If you are running Linux and the social world is designed for Windows, you have to manually code things that other people do via automatic shortcuts. It takes more energy, and the lag time is longer.
Speaking of automatic shortcuts, let's focus on the most potent nonverbal signal we possess, eye contact. It is uniquely human. Other primates gaze, but humans have a large visible sclera, the white of the eye, which makes tracking gaze direction incredibly precise. But biologically, it does something fascinating to our brainwaves.
It creates a wireless connection.
Literally, when two people lock eyes, their brains engage in neural synchronization. We see a dramatic increase in synchronization within the gamma frequency band. This is often called interbrain synchronization.
It is essentially a neural handshake, and interestingly, the strength of this synchronization predicts the quality of the relationship. Research shows that friends exhibit much higher interbrain synchronization during eye contact than strangers do. The better you know someone, the faster your bandwidth is.
And this synchronization is predominantly observed in the right hemisphere of the brain, which handles holistic, emotional, and nonverbal processing. The right hemisphere is effectively tuning in to the other person's frequency.
However, for many people, especially those with social anxiety or neurodivergence, this intensity can feel overwhelming. It's like looking directly into the sun. The signal is too strong.
So how does one manage that intensity without breaking the connection?
You use a diffuser. We call it the triangle method. Instead of locking lasers into their pupils, you rotate your gaze between their right eye, their left eye, and their mouth. You spend a few seconds on each point. It looks like natural eye contact to the observer, but it breaks the intensity for the sender, reducing that overwhelming neural load.
That reduces the threat response while maintaining the social signal of attention. Now, moving down from the eyes, we have the broader category of body language, posture, gesture, and proxemics.
This is about reading the room and projecting your own state. The fundamental binary here is open versus closed.
Explain that distinction.
A closed stance is protective. Crossed arms, hunched shoulders, legs crossed tightly, holding a drink in front of your chest. It's shielding the vital organs. Evolutionarily, it says, I am under threat or I am not accepting new data. An open stance exposes the torso. Arms are relaxed, palms are visible, legs are shoulder-width apart. It signals safety and confidence.
And this relates to proxemics, the study of personal space.
Right. We all have invisible bubbles. Intimate space, personal space, social space. Social ineptitude often comes from popping someone's bubble too early. But a huge part of body language is mirroring. When we have rapport with someone, we naturally mimic their posture. If they lean in, we lean in. If they cross their legs, we cross ours.
Mirroring activates the mirror neuron system, which is crucial for empathy. But it has to be subtle. If it's too precise, it feels like mockery.
Exactly. It's a delay effect. You don't want to be a mime. You want to be an echo. If they shift their weight, wait 10 seconds, then shift yours. It signals to their subconscious, I am like you. We are in sync.
We have covered the visual, but we must address the auditory, paralanguage. This encompasses pitch, volume, pace, and prosody. It's the music of the voice rather than the lyrics.
This is where so many misunderstandings happen. You can say the phrase, that's great, in 5 different ways, and it means 5 different things. That's great is joy. That's great is confusion. That's great, flatly, is sarcasm or disappointment.
This brings us back to the issue of incongruence. When the tone contradicts the words, the brain detects a threat. This is particularly tricky for people who have a monotone vocal delivery or flat affect, which can be common in depression or autism. They may feel joy, but their paralanguage signals disinterest.
And on the receiving end, if you aren't calibrated to that person, you will misread them entirely. This leads us directly into the danger zone, common misreadings.
This connects deeply to our previous episode on rejection sensitivity. When the brain is primed to fear rejection, it engages a negativity bias.
The negativity bias is a survival mechanism gone rogue. In social anxiety, the brain defaults to the worst-case interpretation of ambiguous cues. If someone checks their watch, a confident brain thinks, they wonder what time it is. An anxious brain thinks, they are bored and want to escape me.
This is the rejection sensitivity dysphasia feedback loop. You perceive a neutral cue, like a pause in conversation, as a rejection. Your amygdala activates, sending stress hormones. Your body language then becomes closed and defensive. The other person sees your defensive body language, feels uncomfortable, and actually does pull away. You created the rejection you feared.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We also have to consider cultural differences. In some cultures, direct eye contact is respectful. In others, it is a challenge to authority. In some cultures, long pauses are a sign of deep thought. In the West, they are awkward silences. If you judge everyone by your local calibration, you're going to get a lot of false error messages.
So, how do we recalibrate? We understand the theory, the neuroscience, and the pitfalls. What are the practical mechanisms for improving our social perception?
We need to treat this like a sport. You don't get better at tennis just by reading physics books about ball trajectory. You have to get on the court. The first exercise is what I call the silent movie.
Explain how that works.
Take a TV show that has high social dynamics, something like a drama or a sitcom. Turn the sound completely off. Watch a scene for 2 minutes. Try to narrate the emotional arc just by watching the body language. Who holds the power? Who is insecure? Who is lying? Then turn the sound on and re-watch it to see how accurate you were. You are forcing your brain to rely solely on the VLPFC and STS visual processing without the crutch of language.
That isolates the variable. Excellent. What about self-awareness?
Mirror practice. It sounds narcissistic, but it's diagnostic. Stand in front of a mirror and have a conversation on the phone. Watch your own face. Do you look as interested as you feel? Do you have a resting worry face? Many of us think we are smiling, but the mirror shows a neutral grimace. You have to learn what your face feels like when it's actually conveying what you intend.
And finally, we need external data. We need feedback loops.
Yes, if you have a trusted friend, someone safe, ask them, "Hey, when I'm listening, do I look engaged or do I look zoned out?" We often have blind spots. I had a client who didn't realize he furrowed his brow deeply when he was concentrating. Everyone thought he was angry at them, but he was just listening hard. One piece of feedback changed his entire social life because he learned to relax his forehead.
It's remarkable how small physical adjustments can alter the entire trajectory of a relationship. We are signaling constantly, whether we intend to or not.
We are, and the goal isn't to become a hyper-vigilant robot analyzing every blink. The goal is fluency. Once you practice these things, the eye contact triangle, the open posture, the tone check, they become automatic. You stop thinking about the mechanics and start connecting with the person.
And that connection is the ultimate goal. We have discussed how to manage the internal fear of rejection, and now we have covered how to read and send the signals of safety and interest. But signals alone do not build a relationship. Eventually, you have to open your mouth and speak.
That's the terrifying part for many, the "what do I say" moment.
Exactly. In our next episode, we are going to tackle conversation fundamentals. We will move from the silence of nonverbal communication to the mechanics of speech. We will deconstruct why small talk feels impossible for analytical minds, the neuroscience of dialogic inner speech, and how to move from discussing the weather to discussing life's meaning without it being awkward.
We're going to solve the "I don't know what to say next" problem once and for all.
Until then, keep your eyes open, check your posture, and listen to the silence. This has been Social Skills Masterclass. Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass,
where we dissect the hidden mechanics of human connection.
You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass. In our previous discussion, we spent a significant amount of time decoding the silent language of interaction. We looked at how the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex integrates facial expressions, how the basal amygdala filters emotional signals, and how the simple act of eye contact can trigger gamma frequency synchronization between two brains. We established that before a single word is spoken, a conversation has already begun.
But eventually, you have to open your mouth. You have to bridge that gap between observation and interaction. And for many, that transition, the moment silence breaks, is where the real anxiety sets in.
Precisely. We are moving from the internal neurobiology of signal processing to the external mastery of verbal exchange. Today, we are dissecting the anatomy of conversation itself. We are going to explore the trajectory from that first, often dreaded small talk to the kind of deep, resonant connection that actually alters neural circuitry.
We'll be covering why small talk feels so painful for so many intelligent people, the specific neuroscience of what happens when we truly click with someone, and a tactical framework called the ARE method that makes initiating conversation almost automatic.
We will also look at the liking gap, a psychological phenomenon that distorts our perception of how well an interaction went and why active listening is statistically more important than anything you actually say.
It's about moving from the terrifying blank page of a new interaction to a flowing dialogue. So let's start with the resistance. Why does this feel so hard? Why do we look at a stranger or a colleague and feel a physiological spike of dread at the thought of saying hello?
It is often categorized simply as shyness, but the mechanism is more complex. In the context of social anxiety, we are looking at what psychologists call the ambivalence trap. It is a state of cognitive dissonance. On one hand, there is an innate human drive to connect. We are a gregarious species. On the other hand, there is an overpowering inhibition system screaming escape. You are stuck between the desire to engage and the fear of the outcome.
It's like having one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, and the engine just revs, which manifests as that frozen feeling.
Exactly. The brain is running a predictive model that anticipates failure. The fear is rarely about the greeting itself. It is the fear of the void that follows, the fear of running out of things to say, the awkward silence, or the social catastrophe of being perceived as boring.
That's the paradox right there. We put so much pressure on ourselves to be interesting. We think we need to have a stand-up comedy routine or a fascinating anecdote about climbing Everest ready to go. But the data suggests that trying to be interesting is actually the wrong goal. The goal should be being interested.
Which shifts the cognitive load entirely. When you focus on being interesting, you are engaging in high-stakes performance monitoring, which taxes the prefrontal cortex and actually reduces your verbal fluency. When you focus on being interested, you engage the brain's curiosity networks, which are far more resilient to anxiety.
Let's look at what is happening under the hood when a conversation actually works, when we get past that anxiety and get into a rhythm.
The neuroscience of successful conversation is fascinating because it extends the concept of neural synchronization we touched on last time. When we engage in face-to-face dialogue, we aren't just exchanging data packets. We are engaging in a process called neural coupling. The speaker's brain activity and the listener's brain activity actually begin to mirror one another.
It's like a wireless sync.
Effectively, yes. And this involves the prefrontal cortex, which manages the executive function of communication, organizing thoughts, predicting responses, but it also heavily recruits the superior temporal sulcus, or STS. Think of the STS as the switchboard of social perception. It was processing the eye gaze and body language we discussed last episode, and now it is integrating that with the semantic meaning of the words being spoken.
So when we say a conversation flows, that isn't just a metaphor. It's a literal synchronization of neural firing rates.
Correct. And there is another layer involving dialogic inner speech. This is where the theory of mind networks come online. As you are speaking, my brain is running a simulation of your perspective to understand not just what you are saying, but why you are saying it. This dual processing, understanding the content and simulating the intent, is what creates the feeling of connection.
And interestingly, research shows that long conversational pauses activate different circuits than we expect. We think a pause means failure, but in a comfortable dialogue, a pause is just a processing cycle. However, in an anxious interaction, the brain interprets that silence as a threat, triggering the amygdala.
Which brings us to the practical application. If the brain craves synchronization, but anxiety creates a barrier, how do we initiate that sync? How do we get the wheel turning?
We have to rehabilitate the reputation of small talk. People often dismiss it as superficial or meaningless. They want to skip straight to the deep philosophy, but you cannot do that. Small talk is the handshake protocol. It's the ramp that allows the neural synchronization to begin. You can't merge onto a highway at 60 miles an hour from a dead stop. You need the on-ramp.
I like that analogy. It is a ritualized signal of non-hostility.
Precisely. And to navigate that on-ramp, I recommend the ARE method. ARE, anchor, Reveal, encourage. It's a 3-step loop to get a conversation airborne.
Let's break that down. Anchor.
The anchor is an observation about your shared reality. It connects you and the other person to the immediate context. It could be the weather, the long line for coffee, the bizarre art on the wall. It says, we are both here, experiencing the same thing right now.
It grounds the interaction in the present moment, which is low risk.
Exactly. Once you've anchored, you reveal. You share a tiny bit of something personal related to that anchor. If the anchor is the long line, the reveal might be, I'm actually glad for the wait. I need a minute to clear my head before a meeting. You are offering a small hook of vulnerability.
And that reveal is critical because it signals trust. It moves from observational data to internal state.
Right. And finally, encourage. You hand the ball to them. You ask a question that invites them to share. How is your morning shaping up? Or are you heading into a busy day too?
Anchor, reveal, encourage. It creates a complete circuit.
And it prevents the interrogation vibe. If you just ask questions without revealing anything, people feel scrutinized. If you just reveal without asking, you're monologuing. This balances the exchange.
Regarding the encourage phase, the type of question matters immensely. In behavioral analysis, we distinguish between closed and open-ended questions. A closed question, did you have a good weekend, solicits a binary yes-no data point. It halts the flow.
It's a conversation killer.
Whereas an open-ended question, what did you get up to this weekend, requires a narrative response. It forces the other person's brain to access memory and language centers, which provides you with more hooks to continue the dialogue.
I always tell people, if you find yourself in a dead end, look for the shared experience. Topics usually fall into 3 buckets: situational, what's happening around us; personal, what do you do, where are you from; and philosophical, values and opinions. You start situational, that's the safest. Then you test the waters with personal.
And this transition relies heavily on the 80-20 rule of communication.
Listen 80% of the time, talk 20% of the time.
This is where active listening comes in. It is often touted as a soft skill, but it is a cognitive superpower. Most people do not listen, they wait for their turn to speak.
Or they are mentally rehearsing their next brilliant point while the other person is still talking.
Which effectively decouples that neural synchronization we mentioned earlier. If I am planning my response, I am using my prefrontal cortex for simulation rather than for reception. I am no longer present with you.
Active listening is physically active. It involves the nonverbal cues we discussed last time, nodding, leaning in, maintaining that triangle of eye contact. But verbally, it involves paraphrasing and reflecting emotions. If someone tells you about a difficult project, you don't just say, that sucks. You say, it sounds like you're incredibly frustrated because the goalposts keep moving.
That is labeling. By labeling the emotion, you demonstrate empathy and validation. It proves you have built an accurate model of their mental state.
And clarifying questions are huge here. Asking, when you say the project is stalled, do you mean technically or politically, shows you are invested in the nuance. That builds trust faster than any impressive story you could tell about yourself.
This leads us to the concept of deepening the conversation. We have successfully navigated small talk. We are actively listening. How do we move to meaningful connection? There is a barrier here caused by the liking gap.
This is such a relief when you learn about it. Research shows that after a conversation, we almost always underestimate how much the other person liked us and how much they enjoyed the interaction. We walk away thinking, I was awkward, they probably thought I was boring. But when researchers ask the other person, they usually rate the interaction much higher.
We are our own harshest critics. This negativity bias prevents us from taking the risk to go deeper. We assume the other person wants to keep it surface level, but data suggests people actually overestimate the awkwardness of deep talk and underestimate how much gratification they get from it.
We are starved for real connection. If you take a small risk, a slightly deeper reveal, it usually acts as an invitation. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. If I admit that I'm a little nervous about a presentation, it gives you permission to drop your armor too.
But it must be reciprocal. We are not advocating for oversharing or trauma dumping on a stranger. It is a ladder. You step down one rung, see if they follow. If they do, you go deeper. It is a calibrated escalation of intimacy.
And you find that common ground not just in hobbies. Oh, you like golf. I like golf. But in values and challenges. Why do you do what you do is a much more interesting question than what do you do?
It targets the motivation rather than the occupation.
Exactly. Now, to wrap this into something actionable, you cannot learn this just by listening to us. You have to build the muscle.
We suggest daily micro-challenges.
Yes, the stakes need to be low. Tomorrow, set a goal to simply compliment a stranger, not on their looks, but on a choice they made. That is a really cool book you're reading. Then walk away. You don't even need to have a conversation. Just break the seal of silence.
Or ask a barista how their shift is going and actually stop to listen to the answer. Watch their face. See if you can detect the shift from transactional mode to human mode.
Keeping a conversation journal can also help. Just jot down one interaction that went well and one that felt awkward. Analyze the awkward one. Did you ask a closed question? Did you interrupt?
Structured environments like Toastmasters or improv classes are also excellent laboratories for this. They provide a safe container where failure is part of the process.
So, the key takeaway today, conversation is not a performance. It is a practice of synchronization. Start with the anchor, reveal, encourage loop. Listen way more than you talk. And trust that the other person wants to connect just as much as you do. They are likely just as scared of the silence.
We have moved from the silent signals of the body to the spoken bridge of conversation. But there is another layer of complexity in our modern world. We are increasingly conducting these interactions through screens, text, and curated profiles.
And that brings up a massive question. How can you be real when you're digital?
In our next episode, we are going to tackle authentic vulnerability and digital age connection. We will discuss the difference between vulnerability and oversharing, the neuroscience of trust in a digital environment, and how to build genuine bonds when you can't physically see the other person.
We'll also talk about the vulnerability paradox, why showing your weakness is actually your greatest social strength.
Until then, keep listening, not just to this podcast, but to the world around you.
See you next time.
You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass.
Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass.
Today, we are stepping into what might be the most paradoxical territory in the entire landscape of social dynamics. It is a concept that we are biologically wired to crave, yet psychologically conditioned to avoid at all costs. We spend our lives building armor to protect ourselves from it, only to find that the weight of that armor is exactly what prevents us from connecting with others.
It is the difference between knowing someone's resume and knowing their heart. We are talking about the tension between the curated self, especially in our digital age, and the messy, genuine reality of human experience.
Precisely. In our last session, we deconstructed the mechanics of conversation, the how-to of small talk, the ARE method, and the neurobiology of active listening. We built the vehicle. Today, we are talking about the fuel. We are exploring authentic vulnerability and digital age connection.
And this is such a vital progression. You can master all the conversational techniques we discussed previously. You can anchor, reveal, and encourage until you are blue in the face. But if there is no genuine emotional exposure, you are essentially just performing a script. We are going to break down the science of vulnerability, the massive misconceptions surrounding it, and how to navigate this in an era where we are constantly connected, yet statistically lonelier than ever.
To begin, we have to address the definition, because vulnerability is a loaded term. In engineering or computer security, a vulnerability is a flaw, a weakness to be patched. But in social dynamics, the definition flips entirely. Dr. Brené Brown, who has done the foundational research here, defines vulnerability not as weakness, but as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It is the courage to show up when you cannot control the outcome.
That control aspect is key. Think about it like walking a tightrope. If you stay on the platform where it is safe, you have total control, but you go nowhere. Vulnerability is stepping out onto the wire. The misconception is that you have to be falling to be vulnerable. You don't. You just have to be visible and unprotected. And we need to distinguish this from authenticity because people use them interchangeably, but they are distinct concepts.
That is a crucial distinction. Authenticity is the alignment between your internal values and your external actions. You can be authentic without being vulnerable. For example, if I value professionalism and I give a stern but fair presentation, I am being authentic, but I am not necessarily exposing my emotional state. Vulnerability requires a layer of emotional risk.
Exactly. To use a home analogy, authenticity is the architecture of your house, the style, the foundation, the truth of what it is. Vulnerability is unlocking the front door and letting someone inside. You can have a very authentic house that is locked up tight. The problem arises when we conflate vulnerability with oversharing or weakness, which prevents us from unlocking that door.
And that fear of unlocking the door is rooted in our neurobiology. This isn't just a soft skills issue, it is a survival mechanism. When we experience rejection, the same regions of the brain light up as when we experience physical pain. So the brain's default mode is self-preservation. However, when we do engage in vulnerability, the chemical cascade is fascinating. We see a release of oxytocin, the neuropeptide associated with bonding and trust.
Which creates a feedback loop. We often think, I will be vulnerable once I trust this person. But the biology suggests the inverse is often true. Vulnerability is what generates the trust.
Correct. It activates the mirror neuron system. If I show you a genuine emotion, perhaps fear or sadness, your brain simulates that state to understand it. This is the neural basis of empathy. It creates a state called neural coupling, where the speaker's and listener's brain patterns actually synchronize. However, the prefrontal cortex is also heavily involved here. It is constantly running a risk assessment. Is this person safe? Is this context appropriate?
That risk assessment is what leads us to the concept of strategic openness. We aren't advocating for walking up to a stranger at a grocery store and confessing your deepest childhood traumas. That isn't vulnerability, that is a lack of boundaries. We need to talk about the earned right to hear your story.
This is where the vulnerability paradox meets practical application. How do we determine who has earned that right?
It is a process of progressive vulnerability. Think of it like testing the ice on a frozen lake. You don't drive a truck out immediately, you tap it with your foot. You share something small, a minor worry, a slight admission of not knowing the answer to something. Then you watch the response. Does the other person recoil? Do they use it against you? Or do they reciprocate?
You are looking for vulnerability shields versus vulnerability arrows. A shield might be someone changing the subject or minimizing your feeling because they are uncomfortable. An arrow would be judgment or criticism. But a healthy response is reciprocal. It is a signal that says, I see you and I am with you.
Right, and there is a very specific behavior we need to flag called trauma dumping. This happens when sharing is one-sided and used to overwhelm the listener, rather than to connect. True vulnerability seeks connection and considers the other person's capacity to hold that space. Trauma dumping uses the other person as a receptacle. The difference lies in the intent. Are you trying to build a bridge, or are you just trying to unload your cargo?
That intent is linked to the outcomes. Research consistently shows that authentic connection correlates with reduced anxiety, depression, and stress. It acts as a buffer. When we are accepted by others, our self-acceptance increases. It is a sociological phenomenon. Our self-concept is largely a reflection of how we perceive others perceiving us. If we hide our true selves, we can never truly feel loved because we know people only love the mask, not the person behind it.
That is the tragedy of the mask. You can receive a standing ovation, but if you are wearing a mask, the applause never touches your skin. You feel like an imposter.
Which brings us to the modern amplifier of the mask, the digital landscape. We are living through a social media paradox. We have tools designed for connection that are generating profound isolation. Heavy social media use in teenagers, for instance, is linked to a doubling in the risk of depression and anxiety.
It is the curation aspect. We are comparing our blooper reel, our internal struggles, our messy mornings, our insecurities, with everyone else's highlight reel. You scroll through a feed and see promotions, vacations, and perfect relationships. Your brain, which is wired for social comparison to gauge status and safety, interprets this as, I am failing.
And it creates a scarcity mindset regarding social worth. There is also the issue of FOMO, fear of missing out. It drives excessive checking behaviors. But statistically, having hundreds of digital friends does not correlate with lower loneliness. In fact, it can be the opposite if those connections lack depth.
We're stripping away the nonverbal cues we talked about in the last episode. In a text or a comment, you don't get the tone, the micro-expressions, or the neural synchronization. It is low-bandwidth communication. We are snacking on empty calories of connection rather than sitting down for a nutritious meal.
So, how do we navigate this? We cannot simply opt out of the digital world. It is where modern discourse happens. We need to differentiate between routine use and emotional connection use. Routine use, scheduling, checking news, brief updates, is generally neutral or positive. The negative outcomes spike when we use social media to regulate our emotions or validate our self-worth.
Exactly. We have to move from passive consumption to active intentionality. Passive is the doom scroll, mindlessly swiping for an hour and feeling drained afterward. Active intentionality is sending a specific message to a friend saying, "Saw this and thought of you," or using the platform to organize a face-to-face meetup.
Let's look at this through the lens of professional networking, specifically platforms like LinkedIn. There is a movement toward being authentic there, but it often feels performative. How does one balance vulnerability with professional boundaries online?
It is about relevance and value. If I share a personal struggle on a professional network, the goal shouldn't just be to get sympathy. It should be to offer a lesson or a perspective that helps others. For example, posting, "I had a terrible day, my boss is mean," is unprofessional venting. Posting, "I recently failed at a project, and here are the 3 things I learned about resilience and project management," is authentic vulnerability. It offers value.
You are taking the me out of the center and placing the we in the center. You are using your experience to serve the network.
Precisely. It is also active listening in a digital space. Instead of just broadcasting your own content, engage thoughtfully with others. Read their articles, leave comments that add to the discussion, not just "great post." This mimics the reciprocity we look for in face-to-face conversations.
And ultimately, the goal should be to move from the digital to the analog. The technology should be the bridge, not the destination.
Yes, use the app to find the event, but then go to the event. Use the text to set up the coffee date, but then put the phone away when you get there. We call this phubbing, phone snubbing, when you are physically with someone but mentally on your device. It sends a powerful nonverbal signal. Everything on this screen is more important than you.
That signal destroys the neural coupling we mentioned earlier. It breaks the trust. To integrate this, we have to look at healthy digital habits. It is about boundaries, designated phone-free times, turning off notifications so we are not in a constant state of reactive alert.
And realizing that video calls, while not perfect, are significantly better than text because you regain some of those visual and auditory cues. If you can't be there in person, get as close to it as possible.
We are aiming for a state where technology supports our humanity rather than eroding it. We want to use these tools to maintain relationships, not replace them.
It comes back to that core concept of courage. It takes courage to put the phone down and sit in an awkward silence. It takes courage to post something that reflects who you actually are, rather than who you think people want you to be. And it takes courage to tell a friend, "I'm actually struggling right now," instead of just sending a thumbs up emoji.
The research backs this up. The liking gap suggests we underestimate how much others appreciate our candor. We assume we will be judged, but usually we are met with relief. Others are waiting for permission to drop their shields too.
When you drop your shield, you give everyone in the room permission to drop theirs. That is the leadership of vulnerability.
To summarize our journey today, vulnerability is not weakness. It is the mechanism of trust. It requires the prefrontal cortex to assess safety, but it relies on the mirror neuron system to build empathy. We must practice strategic openness, testing the waters and ensuring reciprocity, rather than engaging in trauma dumping.
And in the digital realm, we must resist the comparison trap. We need to use technology as a tool to facilitate real-world connection, focusing on quality over quantity and active engagement over passive scrolling. Authentic presence, whether online or offline, is about alignment and the courage to be seen.
This lays the groundwork for the next critical step. We have discussed the internal mechanisms of anxiety, the mechanics of conversation, and now the depth of vulnerability. But where do we apply this? How do we build the structures that hold these connections over years?
We are talking about the crisis of modern adulthood, friendship. In our next episode, we are going to tackle making and maintaining friendships as an adult.
It is harder than it used to be. The organic structures of school and university are gone. We will explore the 3 requirements for organic friendship, why it takes 200 hours to make a close friend, and how to overcome the awkwardness of asking another adult, "Do you want to hang out?"
It is going to be a very practical guide to solving the loneliness epidemic in your own life.
Until then, try dropping the shield just a few inches. You might be surprised by who is standing there with you. You have been listening to Social Skills Masterclass. Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass.
You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass.
In our last discussion, we navigated the complex, often terrifying landscape of authentic vulnerability. We looked at the neuroscience of trust, the role of oxytocin, and the paradox that showing our rough edges is actually what allows others to bond with us. But vulnerability is, in many ways, just the fuel. It is the energy source that powers a connection. Today, we have to talk about the engine itself. We are shifting our focus to a structural crisis that affects almost every adult in the modern world, yet is rarely discussed with the scientific rigor it deserves.
It is the crisis of the empty calendar and the full phone contact list. It is the paradox of hyperconnectivity matched with profound social isolation. We are talking about the mechanics of making and maintaining friendships as an adult.
This is not a soft topic. The literature suggests that the decline in adult friendship is a public health issue comparable to smoking or obesity. But today, we aren't just lamenting the state of things. We are deconstructing the sociology and psychology behind why it is so difficult, and then rebuilding a protocol for connection based on data. We are going to explore the liking gap, the specific hourly investment required to forge a bond, and the cognitive reframing necessary to move from acquaintance to ally.
And this is crucial because most of us are operating on a childhood operating system in an adult world. When we were young, friendship was something that happened to us. It was environmental. Now, as adults, we keep waiting for that lightning to strike, but the weather patterns have changed completely. We have to stop waiting for friendship to happen and start engineering it.
Precisely. Let's look at the structural shift first. Sociologists have identified 3 key ingredients that are required for organic friendship formation. These are proximity, repeated unplanned interactions, and a setting that encourages vulnerability. Think about the college dormitory or the military platoon. You have all 3. You live nearby, you bump into each other constantly without scheduling it, and you are navigating shared stressors.
It is a perfect petri dish for connection, but then we hit what researchers call the great scattering. We graduate, we move for jobs, we get married, we have children. Suddenly, that proximity is gone. Repeated unplanned interaction drops to near zero because everything requires a calendar invite and a commute. And vulnerability, that gets buried under professional armor and the need to look like we have it all together.
The data quantifies this loss of organic friction. Research from the University of Kansas creates a daunting timeline for friendship creation. It takes approximately 50 hours of time together to move from a mere acquaintance to a casual friend. It takes 90 hours to move to the status of a friend. And to reach the level of close friend, the kind you can call at 2 a.m., requires upwards of 200 hours of face-to-face interaction.
That number is staggering when you think about the modern schedule. If you only see someone for coffee once a month for an hour, it would take you over 4 years to reach casual friend status. This explains why we feel like we are spinning our wheels. We are trying to pay a 200-hour mortgage with pocket change. The math simply doesn't work unless we radically change our strategy.
And that is just the logistical barrier. We also have to contend with the internal, neurological, and psychological barriers. Even if we have the time, many of us are stopped cold by what psychologists call the liking gap.
This is one of my favorite concepts because it is so relatable. The liking gap is a cognitive bias where we consistently underestimate how much a new person actually liked us. You walk away from a conversation thinking, I was awkward, I talked too much, I probably bored them. Meanwhile, the other person is walking away thinking, they were interesting, I hope we can talk again.
It is a failure of metacognition. We are judging our internal state, our anxiety, our self-criticism, against their external performance. We assume their silence is judgment, when often it's just them listening. This creates a false feedback loop. We perceive rejection where there is none, so we don't follow up. We don't send that text. The friendship dies not because of a lack of chemistry, but because of a hallucinated rejection.
It's like we are watching a movie of our social interactions, but we are the only ones wearing 3D glasses that highlight every flaw and stumble. Everyone else is just watching the movie. This is where social anxiety and perfectionism hijack the process. We feel this pressure to perform friendship, to be witty and impressive, rather than just being present. And thanks to social media, which we touched on last episode, we are comparing our blooper reel to everyone else's highlight reel, which only amplifies that fear of not being enough to warrant someone's time.
So we have a high hourly cost of entry, and we have a psychological bias telling us we can't afford it. The only way to break this deadlock is to shift from a passive mindset to an active, intentional one. In childhood, friendship was passive. In adulthood, it must be active.
Exactly. You have to become the architect of your social life. I like to think of this as moving from being a gatherer to a farmer. You can't just wander around hoping to find wild friendships growing in your path anymore. You have to plant seeds, water them, and protect them from pests. That means taking the initiative. It means being the one to say, let's schedule this, rather than leaving it at the vague, we should hang out sometime.
That phrase, we should hang out sometime, is the graveyard of adult connection. It is a social pleasantry that mimics intent without carrying the cognitive load of planning. To be intentional, we must overcome the fear of appearing desperate. There is a pervasive cultural narrative that if you are pursuing friendship, there must be something wrong with you. But in a world where everyone is lonely, the person who reaches out is not desperate. They are a leader.
That is a powerful reframe. You are not begging for attention. You are offering an opportunity for connection. So let's talk about where to plant these seeds. If we need 50 hours for a casual friend, we cannot rely on random chance. We need what sociologists call containers.
A container is a recurring, structured environment that mimics the conditions of school or college. It forces proximity and repetition. This is why joining a book club, a recreational sports league, or a volunteer organization is far more effective than going to a networking mixer. A mixer is a one-off event. You have to start from zero with every interaction. A class or a club provides the same time, same place consistency that lowers the barrier to entry.
It creates a default yes. If we are both in a hiking group that meets every Saturday, I don't have to summon the courage to hang out this Saturday. The structure does the heavy lifting. I just have to show up. This removes the scheduling tax that kills so many budding friendships. Over time, that consistency builds safety. You see the same face, you share a small joke about the weather, and slowly the wall comes down.
Once you are in that container, however, you cannot just rely on osmosis. You have to understand the cultivation process, the funnel from acquaintance to close friend. We can visualize this in stages. Stage 1 is the hello and small talk. This is simply acknowledging existence. Stage 2 is the pivot, suggesting a one-on-one interaction outside the container.
The pivot is the hardest part. It's that moment you say, hey, do you want to grab a coffee before the meeting starts? Or, I'm checking out that new exhibit, want to join? You are moving the relationship from a public, safe space to a semi-private, personal space. This is where the risk of rejection feels highest. But remember the liking gap. They probably want to go, they are just waiting for permission.
And once you have successfully pivoted, you enter stage 3, moving from activity-based time to conversation-based time. This is where the vulnerability we discussed last time becomes the currency. You cannot build a close friend on discussing the weather or the activity itself forever. You have to begin to share opinions, values, and eventually struggles.
I think of this as testing the bridge. You don't drive a semi-truck of emotional trauma across a bridge you just built. You roll a bicycle across first. You share a small struggle or a slightly controversial opinion. If the bridge holds, if they reciprocate, if they validate, then you can bring a heavier load next time. That is stage 4. It's progressive vulnerability.
And finally, stage 5 is the establishment of routine connection and mutual support. This is where the friendship becomes self-sustaining. But getting there requires maintenance. It requires what we call maintenance strategies.
In the adult world, out of sight really is out of mind, unfortunately. Our brains are prioritizing survival, work, and family. Friends fall off the radar. Maintenance means regular check-ins. And here is a key distinction: quality over quantity. One meaningful 40-minute phone call where you are truly present is worth 20 surface-level text messages.
We also must address the concept of reciprocity. In a healthy dynamic, the initiation of contact shouldn't be 100% on one side. It functions like a tennis match. If I serve the ball, meaning I reach out or plan an event, and you don't hit it back, the game stops. However, in the early stages of adult friendship, one person often has to be the cruise director for a while until the momentum shifts.
That is true. You might have to initiate the first 3 times, but eventually you want to see that ball come back over the net. If it doesn't, that brings us to a difficult reality: navigating friendship changes and endings.
We are conditioned to believe that friendships should be eternal, but the data shows they are often seasonal. As our life circumstances change, new jobs, new cities, parenthood, our capacity for certain types of friendship changes. There is a concept of pruning that is necessary. We have a finite amount of cognitive and emotional bandwidth.
This is where we have to normalize grief. Losing a friend, even if it's just a slow fade, hurts. It is a valid loss, but we often treat it as a failure. We think, I couldn't keep this person in my life, so I failed. No, the relationship served its purpose for that season. It is okay to let a friendship transition from active to dormant. You aren't necessarily ending it. You are just acknowledging that right now, you can't pay the 200-hour mortgage.
That acceptance is part of having a growth mindset regarding social skills. People with a fixed mindset believe they are either good or bad at making friends. If they have an awkward interaction, they catastrophize it as proof of their inherent unlikability. A growth mindset views social friction as data. An awkward silence isn't a verdict, it's just a moment to learn from.
Resilience is the secret weapon here. If you treat social skills like learning a language, you expect to mispronounce words. You expect to conjugate verbs incorrectly. You don't quit French because you messed up one sentence. In friendship, you will have awkward pauses. You will have invocations that get turned down. If you can shrug that off and say, okay, next time, you become unstoppable.
And this brings us back to the core idea: agency. The decline of organic structures means we must assume agency over our social lives. We must understand the time cost, override the cognitive biases that scream they don't like you, and intentionally build the containers where connection can grow.
It is work. I won't pretend it isn't. It takes courage to say, I am looking for connection. But the payoff is a life that isn't just busy, but full. A life where you are seen and understood.
However, once we have done this work, once we have opened ourselves up, built the connections, and invited people into our lives, we encounter a new set of challenges. How do we ensure that these new connections respect our time, our energy, and our values? We have built the bridge, but now we need to install the gates.
That is the tricky part. Many of us are so desperate for connection that we let people walk all over us just to keep them around. We confuse being a good friend with having no limits.
Exactly, which is why in our next episode, we are going to tackle the crucial skill set of setting boundaries and assertive communication. We will explore why boundaries actually strengthen relationships rather than end them, and how to find your voice without aggression or guilt.
It's about learning to say no so that your yes actually means something.
For now, consider where you can start planting your seeds. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye for now.
This is Social Skills Masterclass.
Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass.
In our previous discussion, we conducted a deep dive into the logistics of adult friendship, The sheer volume of hours, the proximity, and the shared vulnerability required to forge a bond after the organic structures of school and university fade away. We established that building a social circle in adulthood is an act of deliberate construction.
It's heavy lifting. We talked about the 200 hours required to move someone from acquaintance to close friend. But here is the question that naturally follows. Once you have built that house, how do you keep the roof from caving in?
Precisely. There is a specific mechanism that, if neglected, causes even the most promising relationships to rot from the inside out. It is the paradox of the nice person. We often assume that total accommodation, being the person who always says yes, always helps, and never complains, is the glue of a relationship. However, the data suggests the exact opposite.
It's the people pleaser's trap. You think you are securing the connection by flattening yourself, but you are actually making it impossible for the other person to connect with the real you. Today, we are dissecting the architecture of self-preservation in social dynamics. We are talking about setting boundaries and the art of assertive communication.
We are going to cover the neurobiology of why saying no feels like a physical threat, the spectrum of communication styles from passive to aggressive, and we will break down a highly technical framework from dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, that serves as a blueprint for asking for what you need.
And we are going to give you the scripts, because knowing you should set a boundary is very different from knowing how to say the words without feeling like you're throwing a hand grenade into the room.
Let's begin with the boundary crisis. This connects directly to the liking gap we discussed last time. We underestimate how much people like us, which drives a fear of rejection. When we fail to set boundaries, we are usually driven by three primal fears: the fear of hurting feelings, the fear of immediate conflict, and ultimately, the fear of abandonment.
It feels safer to suffer in silence than to risk the relationship. But I like to think of resentment as a radioactive isotope. If you say yes when you want to say no, you bury a little pellet of resentment in your pocket. One isn't a big deal, but after 5 years of saying yes to events you hate, or loaning money you can't afford, or listening to emotional venting when you're exhausted, those pellets accumulate. Eventually, you get radiation poisoning. You explode, or you just ghost the person entirely.
That is a chemically accurate analogy. When we suppress our needs to keep the peace, we are essentially dysregulating our own nervous system. Research indicates that effective boundary setting actually regulates stress hormones like cortisol. When you are constantly porous, absorbing everyone else's emotions and demands, your body stays in a state of chronic low-level hyperarousal.
So boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They are the immune system of the relationship. They protect the organism.
Exactly. A relationship without boundaries is not intimate, it is enmeshed. And enmeshment invariably leads to burnout. Now, when we say boundaries, most people think of physical space, but the framework is much broader. We need to categorize these to understand what we are actually protecting.
Right. Physical boundaries are the easiest to understand. Personal space, touch, privacy. Please knock before entering. But the subtle ones are where people struggle. Take emotional boundaries. This is huge for the empaths listening. This means realizing that your friend's crisis does not have to become your internal emergency. You can be supportive without absorbing their anxiety.
That distinction is vital. It is the difference between empathy and emotional contagion. Then there are time and energy boundaries. We touched on time scarcity last episode. You have a finite amount of cognitive resources. Saying no to a request is an act of resource management, not an act of rejection.
There are also intellectual boundaries. This is the ability to respect that someone has a different opinion or value system without feeling the need to convert them or be converted by them. And material boundaries. Who can use your car, who can borrow your clothes, how you handle money.
And these are context-dependent. The boundaries you hold with a romantic partner are obviously more permeable than those you hold with a colleague. The friction usually occurs when we apply the wrong context, expecting a friend to have the same access to our time as a spouse, or allowing a boss the same access to our emotions as a therapist.
So if we know we need them, why do we default to silence? This brings us to the style of communication. Most of us swing like a pendulum. We start passive, we swallow our feelings, we apologize for existing. Oh, sorry, I don't mind, whatever you want.
Passive communication is essentially a refusal to accept responsibility for your own rights. You are prioritizing the other person's comfort over your own needs. But the pendulum swings. When the passive person can no longer hold the weight of that resentment, they often snap into aggression.
The explosion. Blaming, dominating, maybe shouting. You always do this. You're so selfish.
Or they detour into the most insidious category. Passive-aggressive. This is the indirect expression of hostility. It is sarcasm. It is the silent treatment. It is agreeing to do a task and then doing it poorly on purpose. It is saying fine when you mean absolutely not.
Passive aggression is poison because it maintains plausible deniability. If you call the person out, they can say, "What? I said I'd do it." It destroys trust faster than almost anything else.
The goal, the sweet spot of social dynamics, is assertiveness. Assertiveness is often confused with aggression, but neurologically they are distinct. Aggression is a threat response. It is often rooted in the amygdala. Assertiveness activates the prefrontal cortex. It is a higher-order executive function. It requires you to identify your need, regulate your emotion, and express that need clearly and respectfully.
Assertiveness is simply stating your reality without attacking the other person's reality. It's saying, this is the situation, this is how I feel, and this is what I need. It doesn't require the other person to be wrong for you to be right.
There is a fascinating feedback loop here. When you successfully advocate for yourself, when you are assertive, your brain releases dopamine. It is a reward signal. However, if you have a history of passivity, your neural pathways for assertiveness are weak. It feels unnatural. This is why faking it till you make it has validity here. You are literally building new neural infrastructure, engaging neuroplasticity to override the fear response.
So let's look at the tools to build that infrastructure. You mentioned DBT earlier. Dialectical behavior therapy is famous for breaking down social skills into algorithms. What is the algorithm for asking for what you want?
The core skill is known by the acronym DEARMAN. It is a script-building tool for objective effectiveness. It stands for describe, express, assert, reinforce, mindful, appear confident, and negotiate.
Let's walk through this with a scenario. Let's say you have a friend who is chronically late. We're not talking 5 minutes, we're talking 30 minutes, leaving you sitting at the restaurant alone. A passive person says nothing but seethes. An aggressive person yells. How does the DEARMAN approach handle this?
First, D for describe. You must state the facts without judgment. You don't say, "You're always disrespectful with my time." That is an interpretation. You say, "We agreed to meet at 7 and you arrived at 7:30. This has happened 3 times this month." Facts only.
Hard to argue with facts. Next is E for express.
Use I statements to connect the facts to your feelings. When I wait alone for 30 minutes, I feel anxious and frustrated because I worry something has happened and I feel my time isn't being valued.
Notice the structure. I feel X when Y because Z. Then comes the hard part. A for assert.
You have to ask for what you want clearly. Do not imply it. Do not hint. I need you to text me if you are going to be more than 10 minutes late, or I need us to schedule our meetups for a time when you can realistically arrive.
And R for reinforce. This is the what's in it for them part.
Correct. If we can stick to the schedule, we'll have more time to actually catch up, and I won't start our dinner feeling stressed.
The M, A, and N, mindful, appear confident, negotiate, are about the delivery, staying focused on the topic and not getting derailed by their excuses.
Right. If the friend says, "Oh, you're being so rigid, traffic was terrible," you stay mindful. You use the broken record technique. You validate them, but return to your point. I understand traffic is bad, but I still need a text if you're going to be 30 minutes late.
That broken record technique is a lifesaver. You don't have to come up with a new argument every time they push back. You just calmly repeat the boundary. It takes the wind out of the conflict.
Let's look at some other practical scripts because the wording matters. How do we handle boundaries in a professional setting?
At work, the boundary is often about capacity. If your boss dumps a new project on you when you're already drowning, the passive response is to just say, okay, and stay up all night. The assertive response is, I have the capacity to do Project A or Project B effectively, but not both simultaneously. Which one is the priority for the team right now?
That is excellent because it puts the decision-making back on the manager without you refusing to work. You are defining the reality of your resources. What about with family? That is often where regression happens.
Family is the boss level. Let's say you have a parent who calls and criticizes your life choices. The script is, I love you and I want to talk to you, but if the conversation turns to criticizing my job, I'm going to have to hang up. And here is the key, Stephen. You have to actually hang up.
This brings us to consequences. A boundary without a consequence is merely a suggestion. This is where many people fail. They state the boundary, the violation happens, and they do nothing. This teaches the other person that your words are empty.
We call this the difference between a boundary shield and a boundary arrow. An arrow attacks the other person. You need to stop doing that. A shield protects you. If you do that, I will step away. It's about your action, not controlling theirs.
But we must prepare our listeners for the reaction. When you start setting boundaries in relationships that previously had none, the other person will not applaud you. They will likely resist. In behavioral psychology, we might see an extinction burst, an escalation of the bad behavior to try and force you back into your old role.
They might say, you've changed, or you're being sensitive, or I guess you don't care about me anymore. That is the guilt trip. It is a manipulation tactic to get you to drop the shield.
It is crucial to recognize that this pushback is data. If someone reacts to your boundary with rage or severe manipulation, they are showing you that they benefited from your lack of boundaries.
Exactly. The people who respect you will adjust. It might be awkward at first. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was interrupting your work. But they will adjust. The ones who don't, well, that tells you about the viability of that relationship.
And we should not expect to become masters of this overnight. You don't start by setting a massive boundary with a toxic parent. You start with low-stakes situations.
Yes, practice on the barista. If they get your order wrong, politely ask for it to be fixed. Practice on a telemarketer. Say, I'm not interested, and hang up without apologizing. Practice saying no to a social plan you don't want to attend without offering a 5-minute explanation of why. I can't make it is a complete sentence.
I can't make it is indeed a complete sentence. I want to highlight a specific neuroscience concept here regarding over-explaining. When we lie or feel insecure, we tend to offer too much detail. It is a signal of submissiveness. When you over-explain your no, you are essentially handing the other person ammunition to dismantle your excuse.
Right. If you say, I can't come because I have to clean my house, they say, oh, do that tomorrow. If you say, I can't make it, I have other plans, the door is shut. The other plan might just be staring at the wall, but that's valid.
It is about reclaiming your agency. We must view this as a muscle. The prefrontal cortex pathways we discussed need repetition. Journaling can be effective here. Writing down a boundary violation that happened during the day and rewriting how you wish you had responded. This is a form of cognitive rehearsal.
And celebrate the small wins. If you told a coworker you couldn't take on their shift and you didn't spend the next 3 hours feeling guilty about it, that is a massive victory.
To summarize, boundaries are not about being cold or distant. They are about sustainability. They allow you to be generous and kind because you are not operating from a place of depletion or resentment.
Real intimacy requires two distinct people. If you don't have boundaries, there is no you to connect with. You're just a reflection of what everyone else wants.
However, even with the best boundaries and the most assertive communication, disagreements will occur. In fact, as you become more assertive, you may find yourself in more direct conflicts because you are no longer hiding your true stance.
And that is scary. Most of us view conflict as a sign that the relationship is failing. But what if conflict is actually a doorway to getting closer?
That is the focus of our next episode. We will be discussing mastering conflict resolution. We will move beyond just stating our needs to navigating the heated, messy reality of deep disagreement without triggering the fight or flight response.
We'll talk about how to fight fair, how to de-escalate, and how to repair the connection when things go wrong.
Until then, practice your I statements.
And try saying no at least once this week. You're listening to Social Skills Masterclass.
You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass. Today, we are moving into territory that makes even the most confident, seasoned communicators sweat. We are talking about the moment the heart rate spikes, the palms get damp, and the logical brain seems to disconnect entirely. We are talking about conflict.
It is the inevitable friction of human interaction. Last time, we spent a significant amount of time constructing the architecture of self-respect by discussing how to set boundaries and communicate assertively. We built the fences, so to speak. But what happens when someone tries to climb over that fence? Or what happens when you and your neighbor disagree on where the property line actually is? That is the focus of this episode, mastering conflict resolution and difficult conversations.
It is a logical progression. Boundaries often trigger the initial friction, but conflict resolution is the mechanism by which we manage the heat that follows. We have a lot of ground to cover today. We are going to look at the conflict avoidance trap, the specific neurobiology of why we lose our cool, something called the amygdala hijack, and the 5 distinct styles of conflict resolution.
We will also be breaking down the tactical skills, how to use I statements effectively, the role of nonverbal communication when you are arguing, and the profound difference between a productive debate and a destructive argument. And finally, we will discuss the art of repair, how to fix things when they go wrong.
To start, we have to address a fundamental misconception. There is a prevailing belief that a good relationship, whether professional, romantic, or platonic, is a relationship without conflict. The data, however, suggests the exact opposite. Research consistently shows that healthy relationships are not defined by the absence of conflict, but by the ability to repair after it occurs. Yet the fear of disagreement is pervasive.
That fear usually stems from a few core anxieties: the fear of damaging the relationship, the fear of being perceived as aggressive, or simply the fear of losing control. We call this the conflict avoidance trap. You ignore an issue to keep the peace, but in doing so, you actually start a war of attrition inside yourself. Resentment builds up, needs go unmet, and ironically, the relationship erodes anyway, the very thing you were trying to protect by staying silent.
It is a paradox. By avoiding the micro conflict, you guarantee the macro failure. To understand why we avoid it, we have to look at the brain. Conflict triggers the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. In our evolutionary past, social rejection from the tribe could mean death. So, when we face a heated disagreement, our brain often categorizes it as a survival threat. This triggers the HPA axis, flooding the system with cortisol and adrenaline.
This is what we call the amygdala hijack.
Precisely. The emotional brain overrides the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logic, reasoning, and impulse control. You literally lose access to your best thinking faculties. This results in the classic fight, flight, freeze response. In a modern argument, fight looks like yelling or defensiveness. Flight looks like storming out or shutting down. And freeze looks like going blank, unable to form a sentence.
That explains why 5 hours after an argument, you come up with the perfect response while you are in the shower. When you are in the moment, your logical brain has essentially left the building. The most critical skill in conflict, before you even say a word, is regulation. You cannot problem solve when you are dysregulated. You have to bring the prefrontal cortex back online.
Deep breathing is not just a cliché. It is a physiological reset switch for the parasympathetic nervous system. Pausing, grounding yourself, acknowledging the physiological surge, these are prerequisites for resolution. Once we are regulated, we can look at how we engage. There is a widely accepted framework that categorizes conflict styles into 5 types. Understanding your default setting is crucial here.
Think of these styles like a navigation system. Most of us have a home setting we default to when stressed. First, there is avoiding. This is the turtle pulling into its shell. You withdraw, postpone, or refuse to engage. It buys time, but it solves nothing. Then there is competing. This is the shark. It asserts its position at the expense of the relationship. It is about winning, not resolving.
Then we have accommodating, which is yielding to maintain harmony. You suppress your own needs to keep the other person happy. While it seems noble, it breeds resentment. Compromising is the middle ground. Everyone gives up something. It is fast, but often leaves both parties only partially satisfied. Finally, there is collaborating. This is the gold standard for important relationships. It is not about splitting the difference. It is about integrating both perspectives to find a win-win that meets everyone's needs.
Collaborating takes the most time and emotional energy, which is why you cannot use it for everything. You do not need to have a deep collaborative negotiation about where to eat lunch. Maybe there you just compromise. But for deep relationship issues or strategic business decisions, collaboration is essential.
Moving from the what to the how, let's discuss the specific communication tools that facilitate collaboration. We touched on I statements in our last discussion on boundaries, but in the context of conflict, they are the primary tool for de-escalation. The structure is specific. I feel, emotion, when, situation, because, reason.
The beauty of the I statement is that it removes the accusation. If I say, you are being disrespectful, you will immediately defend yourself. If I say, I feel dismissed when I'm interrupted because I lose my train of thought, it is much harder to argue with my feeling. It shifts the dynamic from me versus you to us versus the problem.
That separation is vital. Separating the person from the problem allows you to attack the issue without attacking the individual. But this only works if you are also employing active listening. Most people, during a conflict, are not listening. They are reloading. They are waiting for a pause so they can fire their next point.
Real active listening involves paraphrasing. So what I'm hearing is that you're frustrated about the timeline. Is that right? It validates the other person's emotion. And here is the nuance. Validating feelings does not mean agreeing with facts. You can say, I can see why that would make you angry, without conceding that you were wrong. It lowers the temperature in the room instantly.
That validation bridges the gap between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is feeling for someone. Empathy is feeling with them. Neurobiologically, this involves mirror neurons. When we genuinely attempt to understand the other person's perspective, our brain mimics their emotional state, creating a sense of resonance. Techniques like asking, "What is this like for you?" or "Help me understand your perspective," trigger this connection.
But we have to be careful because our bodies often tell a different story than our words. This brings us to nonverbal communication. You can say, I am listening and I am calm, but if your arms are crossed, your jaw is tight, and you are rolling your eyes, the other person's amygdala is going to pick up on the threat, not the words.
We call that congruence. Research suggests that in emotionally charged situations, nonverbal cues carry significantly more weight than the spoken content. If there is a mismatch, the brain trusts the body language. Tone of voice alone can determine whether a sentence is an inquiry or an attack. Eye contact shows engagement, but too much intensity can feel predatory. Physical distance matters too. Giving someone space during a heated moment can be a sign of respect.
And sometimes, despite our best efforts, the conflict boils over. We say things we regret. This is where the concept of repair comes in. As we mentioned at the start, the strength of a relationship isn't about never fighting. It's about how well you clean up the mess.
A genuine apology is a complex cognitive and social mechanism. It requires specificity. A vague, "I'm sorry you feel that way," is often interpreted as dismissive. It is a non-apology. A true apology takes responsibility for the action and its impact. It avoids the word but. As soon as you say, "I'm sorry, but," you have negated the apology and restarted the argument.
Exactly. I'm sorry I yelled, but you made me so mad is blaming. I'm sorry I yelled, I lost my temper, and that was disrespectful, is taking ownership. Furthermore, amends are about action. It is demonstrating changed behavior. If you apologize for being late but continue to be late, the apology loses its currency.
This process of repair and regulation is heavily supported by mindfulness. Studies show that individuals who practice mindfulness are better at conflict resolution because they can observe their emotions without being controlled by them. They can notice, "I am feeling anger," rather than becoming the anger. This creates a crucial gap between stimulus and response, a gap where choice resides.
That gap is the difference between a destructive argument and a productive debate. In a debate, the goal is to exchange ideas and understand. In an argument, the goal is to win and protect the ego. If you find yourself listening only to rebut, you are arguing. If you are listening to understand, you are debating or discussing.
And knowing when to disengage is part of that mindfulness. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is say, I need 20 minutes to cool down so I can have this conversation respectfully. That is not avoidance. That is emotional intelligence.
It creates safety. It tells the other person, I care about this relationship enough to step away before I damage it.
So if we look at the trajectory we have traced today, we see that conflict is not a failure of social skills, but a test of them. We started with the biology, the amygdala hijack that primes us for fight or flight. We recognize that avoiding conflict is a trap that leads to relationship erosion.
We unpacked the toolkit, identifying your default style, using I statements to lower defenses, and ensuring your body language matches your intent. We learned that empathy isn't just being nice, it's a strategic tool to de-escalate tension by validating the other person's reality.
And finally, we emphasize that the repair, the genuine apology, and the behavioral change is what actually strengthens the bond. These are the mechanics of turning friction into connection.
But there is a catch. Knowing these techniques is one thing, making them automatic is another. In the heat of the moment, it is incredibly hard to remember to use an I statement or to breathe deeply if you haven't practiced it.
That is the perfect segue. We have discussed the theory and the immediate application, but how do we cement these behaviors so they become our default setting? And how do we apply these social skills when the stakes are highest, not just in a one-on-one argument, but when all eyes are upon us?
Exactly. Next time, we are going to tackle the science of habit formation, how to wire these skills into your daily life so you don't have to think about them. And we are going to apply that directly to the ultimate social fear, public speaking. We will explore how to take the confidence we are building and project it to a room full of people.
From the neurobiology of anxiety to the practicalities of the stage, we will see how practice makes permanent. This has been Social Skills Masterclass.
See you next time.
You are listening to Social Skills Masterclass.
Welcome to Social Skills Masterclass.
In our previous discussion, we navigated the turbulent waters of conflict resolution, exploring how the amygdala can hijack our rational processing during high-stakes disagreements, and how to repair relationships after a rupture. We looked at the intense, acute moments of social interaction where emotions run high and the risk feels immediate. But today, for this final leg of our immediate journey, we are shifting our gaze from the acute to the chronic, from the intense spikes of conflict to the long, steady baseline of everyday behavior.
It is the shift from putting out fires to building a fireproof house. We are asking, how do we take all these complex neurobiological concepts and communication strategies we have discussed and turn them into automatic behaviors? And, perhaps more dauntingly, how do we take that newfound stability and face the ultimate social stress test, standing alone in front of a crowd?
Exactly. We are dissecting the science of habit formation and the neurobiology of public speaking. It is a twofold exploration. First, we need to understand the mechanism of neuroplasticity that allows a conscious effort to become an unconscious competence. Then, we apply that structural resilience to what is statistically one of the most prevalent fears in the human experience.
It's the perfect pairing, really. Habits are about the internal architecture of confidence, what you do when no one is watching or when the stakes are low. Public speaking is the external expression of that confidence, what you do when everyone is watching and the stakes feel incredibly high.
Let's begin with the foundation, habit formation. There is a pervasive pop psychology myth that it takes 21 days to form a new habit. From a neuroscientific perspective, this is a gross oversimplification. The research, specifically from Philippa Lally's study at University College London, indicates a much wider variance. The average is actually roughly 66 days, about 2 months, but the range extends from 18 days to a staggering 254 days depending on the complexity of the behavior.
That is a crucial reality check. If you are trying to overhaul your social personality and you feel like you're failing after 3 weeks, you aren't actually failing. You are just in the middle of the process. The brain is resistant to change because change requires energy. It prefers the path of least resistance.
Precisely. This comes down to the habit loop, a neurological loop that governs any habit. It consists of 3 parts: the cue, the routine, and the reward. Eventually, this leads to a craving. In the context of social skills, the cue might be entering an elevator. The old routine might be looking at your phone to avoid eye contact. The reward is a temporary relief from social anxiety. To change the skill, we have to hack this loop.
And because the brain is trying to conserve energy, consistency matters far more than intensity. This is where people often get it wrong. They go to a networking event, force themselves to talk to 50 people, burn out, and then hide for a month. That is not habit formation. That is trauma.
The data supports that entirely. Consistency beats intensity. A key concept here is the self-selected habit. Studies show that habits we choose for ourselves have a 37% higher success rate than those imposed externally. Furthermore, timing matters. Morning routines show a 43% higher success rate than evening ones, likely because decision fatigue hasn't set in yet.
So, if we apply this to social skills, we are looking at tiny habits. Instead of vowing to be more charismatic, which is abstract and overwhelming, you set a micro goal. For example, after I buy my morning coffee, I will say 1 sentence to the barista beyond the order.
That utilizes habit stacking. You are anchoring a new behavior, the compliment or comment, to an existing neural pathway, buying coffee. This is effective because the cue is already automatic. You don't need to remember to buy coffee, you just need to tack on the social interaction.
It also leverages environmental design. If you want to get better at initiating conversations, you have to put yourself in environments where that cue is triggered naturally. Research on adherence suggests that strategic cues can increase habit success by 58%. If you work from home and never see anyone, you have removed the environmental cues necessary for social practice.
Let's discuss the tracking of these habits. In the formation phase, complexity is the enemy. The most effective method is binary tracking. Did you do it? Yes or no? Complex metrics, like rating the quality of the conversation or how funny you were, can actually hinder formation because they introduce judgment.
Right, because judgment triggers the fear of failure. If you judge the interaction as awkward, your brain tags that routine as painful and avoids it next time. But if the metric is simply, did I open my mouth, then an awkward conversation is still a success. It's a green checkmark.
This leads us directly into the never miss twice rule. Inconsistent schedules are inevitable. You might miss a day of practice due to illness or a crisis. The research suggests that one missed opportunity does not derail the neuroplasticity process, provided you return to the routine immediately. Missing twice, however, begins the formation of a new counterproductive habit, the habit of skipping.
This is where the growth mindset becomes the engine of social development. A fixed mindset says, I am introverted or I am socially awkward, treating these as immutable traits like eye color. A growth mindset says, I am currently unskilled at this specific interaction, but practice will change that.
The implications of that mindset shift are profound. Studies show that adopting a growth mindset significantly reduces reported loneliness and interpersonal distress. When you view an awkward silence not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as a data point for learning, oh, that topic didn't land, I'll try a different one next time. You remove the emotional sting that usually causes avoidance.
It reframes the sensation of cringe. We have all felt that post-interaction regret where you replay a stupid comment in your head. In a fixed mindset, that feeling is shame. In a growth mindset, that feeling is growing pains. It's the social equivalent of muscle soreness after the gym. It means you exerted effort.
And speaking of exertion and effort, we must address the arena where this effort is most visible and the fear is most palpable: public speaking. It is consistently ranked as one of the top human fears, often surpassing the fear of death in self-reported surveys.
Which seems irrational on the surface. You are standing on a stage, no one is holding a weapon, you are not physically in danger, but your body reacts as if you are facing a predator.
That is because, evolutionarily speaking, you are facing a predator. For our ancestors, social inclusion was a prerequisite for survival. To be rejected by the tribe meant death, either by starvation or predation. Standing alone in front of the group, with all eyes fixed on you, mimics the dynamics of a trial or an expulsion ceremony. The brain perceives the potential for mass rejection as a direct threat to life.
So the amygdala hijack we discussed in the context of conflict resolution happens here, but it is arguably more intense because there is nowhere to hide. You get the trembling, the sweating, the racing heart. It is the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, flooding the system with cortisol and adrenaline.
This triggers the classic fight, flight, freeze response. In a modern speaking context, flight is avoiding the presentation entirely. Freeze is the mind going blank, literally shutting down the prefrontal cortex's access to memory. And fight might manifest as defensive body language or speaking too aggressively.
The cruel irony is that the anticipation is almost always worse than the reality. The anticipatory anxiety creates a feedback loop where you fear the fear itself. You think, if I get nervous, my hands will shake and everyone will see and I'll lose credibility.
However, we can interrupt that loop using the very biology that creates it. One of the most fascinating findings in this field is the concept of anxiety reassignment, or reframing physiological arousal. Physiologically, anxiety and excitement are remarkably similar. Both involve high heart rate, high cortisol, and high alertness. Calmness, on the other hand, is physiologically the opposite: low heart rate, low cortisol.
So when you are backstage and your heart is pounding, telling yourself to calm down is biologically impossible. It is like trying to slam a car into reverse while driving 80 miles per hour on the highway. You will destroy the transmission.
Exactly. Instead, the research suggests you should say, "I am excited." You are pivoting the interpretation of the arousal from a threat response to an opportunity response. You aren't trying to lower the energy, you are changing its valence. Studies show this simple verbal reframe significantly improves performance compared to trying to suppress the anxiety.
Another powerful strategy is shifting the spotlight. We get nervous because we are hyper-focused on ourselves. How do I look? Do I sound smart? This is egocentric fear. If you shift your focus to the audience and the value you are providing, I have information that will help these people. It engages the caregiving and service networks in the brain, which can dampen the fear response.
That creates a functional shift in the brain's allocation of resources. Visualizing success is another evidence-based tool. Mental rehearsal activates the same neural pathways as physical performance. Athletes have known this for decades. If you visualize the audience nodding, smiling, and engaging, you are priming your brain to recognize safety cues rather than threat cues.
But we have to be careful with visualization. It's not just fantasizing about a standing ovation. You should also visualize handling mishaps. Visualize dropping your notes, taking a breath, and recovering. That way, if something goes wrong, your brain says, "Oh, we practiced this scenario. I know what to do," rather than spiraling into panic.
Which speaks to the importance of embracing imperfection. The standard for public speaking is not flawlessness, it is connection. Intentionally making small mistakes, or at least not hiding them, can actually increase audience rapport. It humanizes the speaker. This is known as the pratfall effect, where a competent person becomes more likable after committing a minor blunder.
For those looking for a practical laboratory to test this, organizations like Toastmasters are invaluable. It provides a structured, supportive environment where the cost of failure is zero. You can desensitize yourself to the physical symptoms of the spotlight.
That desensitization is key. It connects back to our discussion on habits. You cannot think your way out of a fear of public speaking. You can only behave your way out of it. It requires exposure. Start small. Practice with a group of 3 friends, then 5, then 10. You are training your amygdala that the eyes of the tribe do not equal death.
It really brings our entire journey full circle. We started episodes ago discussing the internal chemistry of the brain, moved through the mechanics of conversation and nonverbal cues, tackled the fires of conflict, and now we are looking at how to cement these changes and share our voice with the world.
Indeed. If there is one thread that runs through this entire masterclass, it is that social skills are not a divine gift bestowed upon a lucky few. They are a complex but learnable set of cognitive and behavioral patterns. From the microstructure of a neuron to the macrostructure of a public speech, the mechanism is the same. Understand the science, practice the behavior, and reframe the feedback.
We hope this exploration has given you not just the tools to navigate the social world, but the permission to make mistakes while you learn to use them. Confidence isn't the absence of anxiety, it's the knowledge that you can handle whatever happens next.
Thank you for joining us on this scientific journey through social dynamics.
Keep practicing, keep growing, and good luck.
This has been Social Skills Masterclass.